Yo, what's going on, and welcome back to another Genshin Impact video. And today we are going to be talking about how to build Hu Tao, specifically how I built my Hu Tao and a lot of the decisions I made along the way, as well as things that you're going to want to consider when you're building your own Hu Tao. Now, I've already leveled up my Hu Tao all the way to level 90, and you can kind of see the stats I have here. She's pretty defensive already just looking at this, but she doesn't have nearly as much HP as she could. She's kind of like, I built her really in between on defensiveness and offensiveness to create what I think is going to be a really strong build. And she has quite a bit of defense here as well. Now, when you're building Hu Tao, there's two important things to consider. First of all, her character stat is crit damage. So that means that you either want to stack a whole bunch of crit damage because she already has a whole bunch that comes from her own kit. She gets an extra 38 point something percent extra crit damage. So you want to consider that and maybe stack extra crit damage or value crit rate very highly, which you can see that I was valuing crit rate a lot in my build. And we'll talk about how I accomplished that. Now, your first choice when you're building Hu Tao is what weapon are you using? Now, I don't have any 5-star weapons, so I had a few options here. You can see this I use for my Zhongli, good energy recharge. Definitely something that you could use on Hu Tao, although since her elemental skill has a cooldown that is longer than 12 seconds, it makes it more difficult to use some of these things that work off of your elemental skill because I'll only ever get to 1 stack instead of 2 stacks. Now, other things that I have are like the one from the spear from Dragonspine, which makes ice effects, but I might be using Ganyu with her, but I don't think this is where it's at, especially since it's physical bonus damage. Here we have more energy recharge and elemental mastery. So I went with the battle pass pole arm because like I can control getting this. It's not something that's based off of luck. I obviously don't have a Staff of Homo, which with my build, Staff of Homo would probably be even better. But Deathmatch is still pretty good because it is giving me a large amount of crit rate. Now, the other thing that's really important is your base attack up here, because Hu Tao's elemental skill is going to give you an amount of attack, but it can't exceed 400% of your base attack. And Hu Tao's base attack is fairly low. So you can see I have 454 on my Deathmatch polearm here, and we'll look at what her base attack is in total. It's 561. So that means she has just barely above 100 base attack from the character. And then we're getting 454 from our weapon. So that means that I can get up to 2,200 something or something around there extra attack from her elemental skill. But that also is going to be based off of how much max HP I can build on her. So when we look at why I used the Deathmatch polearm, it's because of all the crit rate, because it's going to synergize well with her character stat of crit damage, because you want to be able to trigger the actual crits, because building crit damage does nothing for you if you have no crit rate. So the more crit rate you have, the better crit damage is. Also, if you don't know what the Deathmatch polearm actually does, is if there are at least 2 enemies nearby, attack is increased by 16% and defense is increased by 16%. If there are less than 2 enemies nearby, attack is increased by 24%. So in situations where there's a whole bunch of enemies, I'm getting attack and defense. And in situations where there's only 1 enemy, like a boss, then I'm getting significantly more attack. Now, when you look at this attack number right here, that 24% attack is in here already. 24% of this is about like 140, something like that. Probably 140. So 140 of this green attack here is just from the buff that my polearm is giving me. You can see that when I'm walking around with my character, I constantly have a buff, and that is the deathmatch buff. So my attack gets a little bit less as I get surrounded by more enemies, but that's not going to be as important because I'm getting most of my attack from my elemental skill. Now when we go back into our artifacts, we can see that I've built a 4-piece Crimson Witch of Flames because this is going to give you the extra pyro damage, as well as you can see that I have very little elemental mastery. It's kind of just how my artifacts played out. I even picked an artifact specifically because it had elemental mastery, instead of picking one that would have given me probably more attack and stuff, just because I wanted to get a little bit of elemental mastery in here, because it can be useful, especially if I'm pairing her with Ganyu. And the other benefit of having 4-piece Crimson Witch of Flames is that you're going to increase melt and vaporize and your burning damage. All those things that are based off of elemental mastery are going to be increased just because you have this 4-piece Crimson Witch of Flames. Now the other part of it is your 2-piece set up here, which gives 15% pyro damage, is going to be increased by 50% when you use your elemental skill. Now, like I was mentioning earlier, Hu Tao's elemental skill is on a 16-second cooldown, so she's not going to be able to stack this more than one time, but it could go up to a maximum of 3. But so she's only ever going to get this to 27.5 bonus pyro damage. But when we combine it with her passive talent, which when she's below 50% HP, she gets 33% pyro damage. Pyro damage is kind of the least of our concerns because we're also running a cup with it. So let's go ahead and look at what all of our artifacts are. Now the first one, Flower, we got a lot of offensive stats in here. Pretty much just what you're looking for. I went with something that rolled really high crit rate. I got some of my energy recharge in here. You kind of want to get like an average amount of energy recharge on her just so your elemental burst will come up at a decent rate. And then everything else is attack. Obviously these attacks could be HP as well, but we got all this HP from our Flower. And because Hu Tao is going to be converting HP into attack, it really doesn't matter if you have attack here. These could easily be HP, but crit rate's important and energy recharge is going to be important. So then when we move on to our Feather, here you can see we have essentially the same thing as our Flower, but the attack stats have now been replaced with 2 different HP stats, which again, those are going to be converted into attack. So it's essentially the exact same piece of gear, except our Flower rolled 1 more into energy recharge, while this rolled 1 more into crit rate. So we're getting 14% crit rate out of here, 12% crit rate out of here. That's a lot of crit rate, and you can see where I got all this crit rate from. Now when we move on to the timepiece I actually went with HP. Now, Hu Tao is a very interesting character because you're free to really do whatever you want with the artifacts. I would make sure that you get the set that you want in the artifacts. So in this case, I really wanted Crimson Witch of Flames. I think that 2-piece is going to be essentially mandatory, but for what you do with the rest of it, you have a lot of different options. If you're running her on a shield comp, you might go like a retracing Bolide, or that doesn't help you, does it? No, you'd need the 4-piece for the retracing Bolide. But you might go something like Noblesse Oblige here for extra elemental burst damage, or just anything that synergizes with the rest of your team. Even something like Lava Walker. If you want to go 4-piece Lava Walker, since you're always going to have people affected by Pyro, because your auto attacks are essentially Pyro, just because of her elemental skill. That is definitely an option. I think you have a lot of different choices for your artifacts and what set you get. And then for the 3 other pieces, the timepiece, the cup, and the hat, you can kind of choose whatever main stat really fits your build, and it kind of depends on your weapon. So in my case, I went pretty damage heavy, but like I said, I kind of split it up. So the timepiece is the one where I went pretty defensive, going HP is the main stat. It gives me about 7,300 HP. So if you were to also do like all 3 of these as HP, my Hu Tao's HP right now would be almost 15,000 higher than this. So I could be getting my Hu Tao to about 46,000 HP if I went HP on everything. Now, I don't, my base attack can't support that much HP, so it'd kind of be a waste, but I could go one more artifact into HP and still get the full effect of the bonus attack. Now, looking at the other stats on it, we got a lot of crit damage on it. We got HP, which is damage. Unfortunately, we got 2 rolls in defense here, but that's how it goes, and that's where I got all of my elemental masteries out of this piece of gear. I definitely had some others that maybe would have given more attack, but I don't think they had crit damage on them, so that's why I didn't go with those. But maybe I'll consider it, because if we look at them, where was it? It was one of these. Not that one. Not that one. This one. Oh yeah, it didn't have crit rate or crit damage, which is why I didn't go with it. But like if you look at this one, it's technically 4 good stats, right? Because it's energy recharge, attack, attack, and then this is also attack because it's HP, which converts into attack. But yeah, those are the 2 that I was between, and I might still try this one just to see which one actually ends up giving me more damage. But I think going with the crit damage, and since we only rolled defense 1 extra time, it wasn't too detrimental here. But then when we move on to our cup, we are using the Blizzard Strayer cup, but that's because it has pyro bonus damage. It's got a lot of good stats. You can see energy recharge, HP, which is attack, crit damage, which is damage, and HP, which is attack again. So this is a 4 good stat cup with the pyro bonus damage, and this is where I went more offensive with my build, because you can either go HP with this, you could go pyro bonus damage like what I went, or you could go attack. You could really do anything that fits into your build. It just depends on what you want to do. And then finally, for my hat, I actually stole my Clee's hat here and gave her this other hat because this hat just isn't as good. This hat's pretty crazy. Unfortunately, it did roll defense once, but other than that, we got another 10% crit rate coming out of here. So out of 3 pieces of gear, we're getting over 30% crit rate, which is going to synergize really nicely with her crit damage. We're getting quite a bit of attack, good energy recharge, and lots of crit damage. So this is where 60% of my crit damage is coming from. Now, if I had something like Staff of Homa, I could obviously have more crit damage than we currently have. But we'll take a look at our stats again. We have 30, almost 31,000 HP. We're at a pretty low attack, but when we go out here and we actually activate our elemental skill, we're going to burn a lot of our HP, but then we can come back here and you see this is what my attack actually is. So my attack is essentially almost 2,700, not the 1,100 you saw earlier, because I've built so much HP. Now again, I could have built a little bit more HP, and I kind of did the math on it. If I built the extra 7,000 HP, the attack that I was gonna get wasn't worth me losing all the crit damage that I have in my build. So you see here I have 180% crit damage. If I switched my hat to HP hat, I'd be losing 60% of this crit damage, and that was equaling less damage than what I currently have here. Plus I was gonna lose crit rate if I did that, but that's just a matter of what the piece of gear I would have been switching to had. Now you can see I have a pretty average amount of energy recharge here, 142. I'd say you want somewhere in the range of 140 to 160 to be able to consistently get your elemental burst. And then you can see our pyro bonus damage here. It's actually boosted a little bit by the effect of the Crimson Witch of Flames at the moment. Because that's giving an extra 7.5%, we would normally be at about 61 point whatever, 61.6 pyro bonus damage. And we can show that really quick if we let her elemental skill run out. And once so it's out now, so we'll go ahead and check it. And you can see like how everything is going to change with the character. Because right now she's at 61.6. This is the base pyro damage that I've built because of the Crimson Witch of Flames plus the pyro cup. So I'm doing 61% extra damage, but you saw the second I press my E, that goes up to 69.1, and that lasts for 10 seconds, so the entire duration of her elemental skill. Now I'm going to show you one other thing, because one of her talents increases her pyro bonus damage when she's below half, so you can see this next time that I press the button here, we're going to go below half. So boom, we press it, we're now below half. So now we check, and we have 102% pyro bonus damage. This is because she's getting the 7% extra for activating an elemental skill, and she's getting 33% extra for being below 50% HP. So I'm essentially doing double damage for being below 50% HP, which is pretty crazy. And combined with the fact that I have 2,700 attack, I have 80% crit rate here, so I'm almost always critting, and I have 180% crit damage. I'm going to be hitting incredibly hard. So this is how I've built my Hu Tao. Now I did run into a little bit of a problem when leveling up my talents. I kind of ran out of these nectar thingies. I need to go farm more. It turns out that the deathmatch polearm here requires the nectar thingies, and Ganyu also required the nectar thingies, so she stole some of those. So at the moment, my talents are not ideal. I could actually be getting more attack out of this skill once it gets higher. Right now, I'm only getting 5% of my max HP, but around like level 9, I'll probably get it at least to level 9 before I decide if I want to crown it or not. It should be like 6.5%, so I'll only just be getting more and more attack as we go. But I do think that this is kind of a good idea of showing which skills you should prioritize. Now, Hu Tao is a DPS character, so she's going to be relying on all of her talents being as high level as you can get them, but I do think that this is the order you kind of want them in. This skill is going to be your primary just because it is giving you raw attack when you activate it, and so as this raw attack gets higher, everything else is going to do more damage. So I think that it is more core than your auto attack. Even though you're auto attacking during your elemental skill is also augmenting your elemental burst because you're getting that extra attack, and if you use the elemental burst during your elemental skill, it's going to deal more damage. So I would prioritize Guide to the Afterlife as your #1 talent, followed very closely by your auto attacks, because obviously you are going to be auto attacking with pyro damage during your Paramita Papilio state created by Guide to the Afterlife. And then last, I would get your Spirit Soother elemental burst as high as possible. I would try and just get these to whatever the max level that you can is. I'll probably try and take them to 9 once I get enough materials to do so. But Spirit Soother is always going to be the last one, just because it's going to do is a burst of damage, while this while these two talents are going to give me my sustained damage, and this healing is only going to go up marginally, and so we don't need it to be like a ridiculous amount, but eventually we'll get to that amount of healing. But yeah, I would focus on this because it gives you raw attack and changes your attacks to pyro, but it's always going to do that. But this giving you raw attack is important because it buffs your autos and it buffs your elemental burst. So I would prioritize that one. And that's pretty much it when it comes to Hu Tao. You got a lot of options with your artifacts. So really just whatever you want to build, you could experiment with some cool sets. I'm sure people might come up with some other possible builds, especially since she's an auto attacker. Going full retracing Bolide with her and a shield character could be viable, because if we look at a retracing Bolide, it gives 40% additional normal and charge attack damage, which you're just spamming normal and charge attacks while you're in your elemental skill. So that could be an incredibly valuable thing, because the thing you need to consider when you're getting like attack or something, attack is only basing off of your base attack. So if you're getting any bonus that just increases damage, which is a completely different thing, because damage is after all calculations have been done, then any multiplications to damage take effect. So this is why I think that pyro bonus damage is so valuable, because after all of my damage has been calculated, then pyro bonus damage just multiplies that number. So this cup is essentially just multiplying my damage by 1.5. Any damage that I would do is 1.5 times as high, which is like what I was saying earlier when we were looking at our details in here. While I have my elemental skill on and I'm below 50% HP, any damage that I do is being multiplied by two times, essentially 200% damage, because this is taking effect after all the other calculations. So things like retracing Bolide that I was just showing are incredibly valuable because it just multiplies your end damage number instead of increasing your attack by 40%. A 40% attack boost would be way less valuable than a 40% damage boost. So that's the only reason I think that you're going to be able to build so many different types of artifacts on her, like a Noblesse Oblige. If you're going a supporty build with her, you could go 4-piece Noblesse Oblige, or some of those artifacts like I was showing with the Pyro Lava Walker stuff. If you had 4-piece Lava Walker, it's going to just make you do 35% more damage, including because you're going to be putting Pyro on people. So that means that once they have Pyro on them, you're just doing 35% more damage. So replacing like the set that I have with a Lava Walker could also be viable. So there's going to be a lot of experimenting still to do, but this is kind of what I've settled on now as a kind of mid-range build, a little bit more focused on damage because we only went 1 HP piece, and then we went damage on cup, damage on hat. You could definitely go 3 HP as long as you have a 5-star weapon that can support you having that amount of HP. You need to actually do math for this character a little bit, because if you don't have enough attack from your weapon, then you're going to be wasting some of the potential you have from your HP. So definitely keep that in mind when you're building Hu Tao. Either way, this character is going to be fun. I'm excited to see what other people can come up with, and maybe I could get a better weapon for her, but I think that deathmatch is going to do fine for me for now. It just kind of is limiting how much HP I can build on her. But again, if I go more offensive like what I have, then it's not a big deal. But either way, hopefully you enjoyed this one. Maybe you learned something about Hu Tao. Should give you an idea of what talents you want to focus first. Give you an idea of what artifact sets are going to be good for you. But again, lots of artifacts are useful. So do what really fits into your build, especially if you're running shielders. Maybe look at that retracing Bolide. And then weapons. Weapon is going to pretty much decide your build, so what you have available to you is dramatically going to change how you build the rest of the character. But yeah, these are the stats that you're looking for, at least the stats that I've gone for. Almost 80% crit, 180% crit damage, an average amount of energy recharge, and just a ridiculous amount of pyro bonus damage if we get below 50% HP, which you can enable yourself just by activating your skill twice. So anyways, that is how I'm building Hu Tao for now, and hopefully it'll give you some insight on how to build your Hu Tao. Hopefully you enjoyed this one, and I will see you next time.